My name is John Schmidt, and I've been incarcerated here for over 13 years. I received a 20-year sentence back in 2002 for several bank robberies and hotel robberies. This is not my first incarceration. I spent 3 years in federal prison from 1996 to 1999 for a bank robbery. And these criminal acts were ultimately a result of money that I owed for gambling. I grew up in a one-parent household with my mother. My father was in my life specifically during the weekends growing up. My father was a bookie for a number of years. He had a job. He kept jobs, but at the same time he used to run tickets, take bets, and things like that. So at an early age, probably around 6 or 7 with my dad, some of my earliest memories with him are gambling related, going down to Delaware Park. So that was one of the things that I remember earlier on with my father in terms of our relationship, things that we did together. My mother was 17 when she had me, and so she was a single mom on her own. My parents were married, I think, for maybe about 2 months. So even before I was 1 year old, they were divorced. And so my mother raised me on her own. She worked as a bartender at Silverside Lanes up in Wilmington. And so a lot of her time I lived right across the street from Brandywine Racetrack, right on Naaman's Road. And my most of my mom's friends, whether they were bartenders or just other friends of her social circle, they worked or hung out at Brandywine Racetrack. So there was a lot of nights when I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old where I would go to Brandywine Racetrack. One of the things I can remember growing up is just how powerful it felt. My dad's side, we would have these holiday outings, like for Christmas and Easter and different holidays, where we would meet at my aunt's house in Lancashire. And there were two tables. There was the table for the men and table for the women, and they were gambling. You know, it was nickel, dime, quarter ante type stuff poker. And I remember when I became old enough, I came to the table, and I was one of the oldest of the grandchildren. So when I finally was old enough, I went to the table, and it was just like this most empowering thing in the world. It was like, here I am with my dad and my grandfather, and my dad was one of 7 brothers. So
a rite of passage.
It was a rite of passage, and it was a way to like kind of to feel some validation. It was great attention, you know, to feel it was powerful to feel that acceptance from my dad, because again we connected. That was such an integral part of our connection. With my mother, growing up with her, she spent a lot of time doing things that I always have to keep in mind that when I was 6, 7, and 8, my mom was 23, 24, and 25. She worked hard. She gave me the things that I needed, but she wasn't around much. My mother ended up meeting a man, and we moved to Cincinnati. And so that was a big change for me. I was in the middle of my 8th grade year, and we moved to Cincinnati. So now I'm having to acclimate myself with a whole different social circle. The financial demographics were completely different. I mean, all the kids drove Volvos, Saabs, and BMWs. Everybody had money at this high school. So I kind of felt a little bit intimidated, so to speak, because I didn't come from that kind of a background. But yet, here I am amongst all these kids. These are my peers. This was kind of the beginning. When I look back at my life and I look back at where things went wrong in terms of the gambling and in terms of me turning away from the track that I should have been on as a child, in terms of the academics and doing some of the normal things kids do growing up, and in terms of going through school, going to college. This was probably the beginning, because I really started making a lot of bad decisions when it came to gambling. I started running tickets in high school. I even ran some of my dad's tickets in elementary school. In 5th grade at Harlan Elementary, I had some of my dad's tickets. I was never comfortable in my own skin. I always felt that I needed to embellish, I needed to manufacture stories or whatever, anything that I could do to feel accepted. I don't know how this happened, but I graduated high school on time by the skin of my teeth. I had a 1.7 GPA. I was 349th out of 411 students in my class graduating. And that wasn't necessarily because I lacked intelligence, it was because I lacked focus. After I graduated high school, I took a job out of Cincinnati that moved me to Atlanta, and it was a wholesale job. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I was successful at it. But I still continued to do the things that I did in terms of gambling. I was still more or less playing a lot of poker with these guys that I was forming relationships with, guys I worked at the restaurant with. I left the wholesale job and took a job at a restaurant. And so the restaurant business, the hospitality industry can kind of be interesting. It can be very cliquey. So I had this circle of friends, and I gravitated towards guys that like to gamble. Guys that like to have, that had bookies that they would place football bets with, and guys that would, we'd play poker a couple, 2, 3 times a week. And so that became, again, that was my identity. And when I look all through my life, that was what I wanted my identity to be. That was the persona that I wanted people to see. And I think it was because I felt so deficient in other areas of my life. This was the way that I decided to have people see me. This was my secure person. This is who I was. I got into a little debt down in Atlanta. I owed $800 to these guys. I had just a couple dollars at the time, so I called my mom and I asked her, can you please Western Union me this money? I owe these guys this money. My mom's like, you better not. I'm like, of course I'll never do it again. You know, and she Western Union me the money. I paid these guys off, and obviously it was a lie because I continued to gamble. I got a job at Outback Steakhouse, and a guy that was there knew a guy who took bets, knew these guys who were bookies. And it was about maybe 3 months or so that I ended up getting in a lot of financial trouble. I owed over, there were guys that gambled through me. I became the individual who were placing the bets because they didn't have these bookies that were able to make these kind of sizable amount of bets. So we ended up kind of making some of the similar bets over the course of a weekend, and we ended up in total $17,000 in debt. One of the things I've always learned, my dad taught me this, he said, always pay your debts, especially your gambling debts. If you owe somebody something, pay it. You know, don't make a bet that you can't pay. So that struck at my pride. This is something I have to be able to do. The girlfriend that I had for about 2.5 years, her sister was a Atlanta police officer, and she worked the robbery division for a number of years. And so during the time of our relationship, I became close with her parents and her sister. So she would always have these stories about, different things that happen with robberies, bank robberies, not catching these guys, and what these guys did, and what these guys wore, and how they got away with it. And so at the time, these stories were just mere entertainment. Yes. But when I owed $17,000, and I couldn't find some of my other friends who owed money to pay, even begin to pay this debt down, I realized I needed a lot of money. And so these stories started coming back to my mind about the odds of getting caught. I decided to do it. And I tried about 4 or 5 different times. I literally pulled like about 30 yards from the bank by a shopping center. I would go up towards the bank and I'd look at the bank and say, I can't do this. I just couldn't do it. Somebody saw me. Somebody came out the bank. I just would make up an excuse to just not do it. So I decided one day I was just going to get drunk off my behind. On November 14th, 1996, I walked into the Nation's Bank with pantyhose over my head and a pellet gun. Don't laugh. And I asked for the money, and they gave me the money. I went on the run. So not only did these guys not get paid, they weren't getting paid. I went on the run. I wasn't looking back at this point. I knew I was in a lot of trouble. I knew what I did was really stupid, and it was going to cost me probably some years of my life. I didn't know how long at that point, but I knew it was going to be a problem. I was caught in Phoenix, Arizona, like 6 weeks later with nothing. I spent a lot of the money on the way. I went to Atlanta. I went to Biloxi, Mississippi. I went to Shreveport, Louisiana, and I ended up being out in Las Vegas for almost a month. I was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. It extradited me back to Atlanta. The whole time I was in prison, I did everything that I did to get to jail in jail. I ran tickets. I wanted no one to know anything about my past, except for the fact that I had this bank robbery. I had this whole persona, this gambling persona. I didn't understand the magnitude of what I did. I had guys that I was doing time with, were like, oh, you're a good guy. It was just something stupid you did. Because I really chalked this thing up as like a streak of bad luck. This was like a bad weekend. And this was just a dumb mistake I made. I didn't really understand a lot of the underlying reasons behind what was motivating me to do these things. What was motivating me to gamble? What was motivating me to want to be accepted, to feel validated? I got out. I got a job. And I was doing okay, but I was still gambling. I was still gambling with my dad. And so when I look back, I'm like, I know any reasonable parent would probably be like, listen, you're not gambling. Not only are you not gambling, you're definitely not gambling with me. And so I was on probation for like 4 months, on federal probation, when finally the probation officer says, oh yeah, by the way, I was reading your report, you're banned from any of the racetracks and racinos here in Delaware. I'm thinking to myself, I probably should have told me that right from the beginning, but it just seemed like nobody took it seriously. I wasn't taking it seriously, so I didn't expect anybody else to. I worked at one job. I worked at this place, Michael's, down in Newark, and it was really good. I was making good money. And the people there knew a little bit about me because I was at work release, and so they knew a little bit about my history. So there I kind of felt a little bit more comfortable about kind of being myself, but I left that job and took a job in Wilmington, and no one knew me there. No one knew me there. And the people that I was hanging out with went to college, had jobs, had families, weren't on probation, weren't hooked on heroin, weren't doing a whole lot of stupid things. So in my eyes, I can't compete with these people. So again, here comes the persona, Johnny the gambler. And so it was all about the facade. You know, I would go to Atlantic City, I would, you know, go to poker games. I would talk about gambling wins and gambling losses. To me, gambling losses were I had just as much pride talking about big losses that I did about big wins, because it was a validation for me. There was a tension there. Oh, you know, hey, John lost 15 grand last night at Tropicana or whatever, you know. And so just even that felt good. I never really understood my value as a person. I never understood the fact that, you know, I was created to do more than what I was doing in my life. I came to Gander Hill in 2001 after 6 banks and 4 hotels. The motives behind those robberies were kind of twofold. It wasn't like the first one where I just owed money and that was my primary motive to get it. It was this time, it was because not only did I owe money at times, but I also was propelled to go to Atlantic City to gamble. I know I needed the money to gamble. Each of the robberies, I had to get drunk to do them. I got to Gander Hill. The first 5 or 6 weeks I was there, found the ticket man, started gambling, started taking over the tickets. And then a guy that I was actually gambling with on the tier hands me this brochure. He's like, hey, you might want to check this out. And it was like one of these NOGs or SOGs diagnostic forms, right? I didn't know what it was at the time, but I'm looking at it and it's asking me, you know, if you did this, if you've lost sleep over gambling, if you've ever committed a crime over gambling, if you ever lied over gambling, if you ever stole over gambling, all these things have you ever done as a result of gambling? I'm like, yes, 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 wow. There was a Gamblers Anonymous group at Gander Hill, and your colleague, Barbara Barr, was running it. Come to find out, there were a lot of guys that had a lot of the same stories, not necessarily verbatim, but there was a lot of the insecurities and the addiction and some of the emotional things that drove gambling. It was probably about, I don't know, a little less than a year into my recovery. I stopped gambling on January 10th, 2002, and haven't gambled since. But it was about a year into it where Barbara had came to me and asked me if I wanted to write this speech, because the Delaware Council on Gambling Problems was doing some kind of workshop or seminar down at Dover Downs. And there was going to be a lot of people there from the Justice Department, judges, attorneys, prosecutors, whoever. And so I wrote it, and I felt good writing it. I felt good being very thorough and honest about myself and where I was at the time and what gambling had done to me. And in addition to thinking to myself, well, how could we help people in the system who have gambling issues? Whether it's sentencing, whether it's treatment, whatever game plan we can get together, what can we do? So my mind was already moving at that point, because it was probably right around then where I'm starting to see myself as somebody who could be not only continue to be in recovery, but to help other people. Over the years, this whole experience has been amazing. I mean, I'm not talking about wearing whites and being in prison. I'm talking about the recovery experience. I'm talking about the learning experience. I've had the chance to run workshops down here through a life skills program. I've had a chance to run many seminars, in the gambling seminars, in addiction seminars over in Green Tree when I was a facilitator over there. There's been numerous opportunities for me to take what's been given to me and give to other people. And that is going to be my life mission when it comes to my career and my future. I have given way too many years of my life to this experience. Has it made me a better person? Absolutely. But I've just lost 12 or 13 earning years that are really important. I mean, it may have changed my life, but there's some things I'll never be able to get back. There's some challenges that I'm going to continue to have in the future. There's some obstacles. We were joking earlier at my restitution. I mean, I have 32,000 in Delaware and another 40,000 in Pennsylvania. That's a lot of money. And I'm not planning on robbing anybody to give it back. It's going to be a long process, but at the same time, it's what I'm looking forward to. It's what my dream is now. Like I said, I had no aim. I had no purpose in my life. What's happened since I've been down here? I mean, I didn't even mention the television interviews that I was able to do to talk about gambling awareness and to talk about my own experiences. You know, people coming because they want to hear that story. That means a lot, and it validates, not only validates me, but it validates what I'm doing and what I'm all about.
Could you talk real briefly about what gambling looks like in this setting, this environment?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's not taken seriously like drugs would be, or cell phones, or shanks, or other things that we talk about when we talk about security. But gambling in here it's mostly it's a lot of pride-related gambling. Guys maybe just playing chess gambling. Guys maybe playing spades, or guys maybe playing checkers or poker. Being a part of that culture for so long and being entrenched in it, I've never seen it as crazy as today. I mean, you know, I think Delaware Park has a lot to do with it. Like, people here, they'll read the paper, they may call their wives and say, "Hey, honey," you know, they'll be on the phones talking about putting bets down at, you know, at the track for them, and pick sixes and whatever, you know, whatever they're gambling on. It's a big deal down here. I talk to a lot of guys in here about gambling, but at the same time I realize that it's also, for a lot of guys in here, something to do. It's eye-opening to see how much of a crutch it can be in people's lives. And for me, I allowed it to define me for so much of my life. And now it's in kind of ironic, I still want it to define me, but in a completely different way.